They came not with a roar, but with a whisper, and the darkness listened. It began on nights when the city seemed quieter than usual. As if the very air had drawn a hesitant breath, people started noticing subtle changes, shadows that lingered longer than they should, corners of rooms that seemed unusually cold, and fleeting shapes that vanished when looked at directly. At first, no one paid much attention. After all, shadows were supposed to be shadows. But then came the whispers. It started with the old man who lived in the brick apartment on Fifth Avenue. He swore he could hear voices when the streetlights flickered, soft, almost melodic murmurs that seemed to call his name. Harold, come closer, let go. He dismissed it at first, blaming insomnia and the city's hum, but soon he could feel them. The shadows moved differently around him, curling like tendrils, pressing against walls as if listening, as if waiting. One night he woke to find the silhouettes of his furniture distorted, stretching impossibly, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw figures hovering where none should exist. By then, the phenomenon had spread. People across the city reported sleepless nights, waking from vivid nightmares of being followed by unseen entities. Phones captured fleeting figures that the eye could not see. Security cameras picked up shadowed forms that slithered along walls with unnatural grace. Authorities dismissed it as mass hysteria, but the unease was undeniable. Businesses closed early, parks emptied at dusk. The city, once vibrant, seemed to shrink inward under the weight of an unseen threat. Among the first to notice the real danger was Dr. Lena Hart, a neuroscientist studying human perception. She had been experimenting with light sensitivity in urban dwellers when the complaints began to flood in. What intrigued her was the pattern. The shadows weren't random. They seemed drawn to certain individuals, people with fragile emotional states, those prone to loneliness, anxiety, or grief. Lena theorized that the shadows were somehow interacting with the human brain, influencing thought patterns, but the mechanism remained elusive. Then came the first confirmed disappearance. A teenage boy named Marco, last seen in the subway, vanished without a trace. Witnesses described a peculiar darkness near the platform, thicker than night, shifting as if alive. Some said they heard his terrified scream swallowed by silence, and then nothing. The incident was dismissed as a tragic accident, but Lena knew better. The shadows were feeding on the mind. Marco's fear had given them an anchor. By the end of the first week, paranoia was palpable. People stopped talking after dark, and windows stayed shuttered. Lena worked tirelessly, observing footage, running neural scans, and cataloging every report of whispered encounters. Each piece of evidence seemed more surreal than the last shadows that duplicated themselves, coalesced into semi-physical forms, and lingered long enough to be felt, cold and dense, like the absence of warmth itself. She realized the whispers weren't just auditory, they were invasive. The shadows weren't merely present, they were communicators, planting ideas, manipulating thoughts, shaping fear into something tangible. And in that creeping, suffocating darkness, the city itself began to change, one mind at a time. The nights grew darker, not because of the absence of light, but because of what lurked within it. Lena's laboratory became a fortress of flickering LEDs and reinforced glass as she delved deeper into the phenomenon. Her team had begun mapping patterns of shadow movement, but every dataset only led to more questions. The shadows weren't merely drawn to fear, they were learning from it, adapting, anticipating. It started subtly. Test subjects who had only experienced mild anxiety began exhibiting erratic behavior, talking to themselves, staring at corners, refusing to leave rooms. The whispers were now intelligible. At first, they were fragmented. You're alone, nobody sees. You can't stop it. Then, over time, coherent suggestions appeared, almost persuasive. People acted on them, small at first, moving furniture strangely, whispering secrets to no one, isolating themselves from friends and family. Lena watched one test subject, a middle-aged man named Douglas, as his demeanor shifted before her eyes. Initially skeptical, he began pacing obsessively, muttering to unseen entities. I have to go, he said one night, eyes fixed on the corner behind the lab. Lena approached cautiously, and the moment she entered the shadow's path, Douglas froze. The darkness around him shimmered subtly, almost alive, and Lena felt an inexplicable chill crawl up her spine. It wasn't just fear the shadows wanted, it was control. Meanwhile, the city's reports worsened. In neighborhoods once vibrant with life, windows were shuttered, doors locked. People spoke of shadows moving independently from their sources, of whispers that made them question their own thoughts. A wave of disappearances followed, each case eerily similar to Marco's. sudden vanishing in areas where darkness gathered unnaturally, witnesses reporting screams swallowed by silence. Panic was beginning to seep through the streets. Then Lena's breakthrough came. Analyzing the neural scans of affected individuals, she discovered micro-patterns in their brain activity spikes, of synchronized waves occurring when the whispers were heard. The shadows weren't physical, they were psychic parasites, using darkness as a medium to infiltrate and manipulate human minds. Once an individual's fear or loneliness reached a tipping point, the shadows could take partial control, guiding thoughts, shaping actions. Lena shared her findings with the city's emergency response unit, hoping for containment measures, but the authorities were slow to act, skeptical of the impossible. Meanwhile, the shadows escalated. One evening Lena returned to her apartment and froze. Her own shadow stretched unnaturally across the floor, writhing as if alive. A whisper slithered into her mind. "You cannot hide. We are everywhere." The sensation was disorienting, almost invasive, as if the darkness inside her was reaching out to grasp her thoughts. It was clear now, the invasion had begun in earnest. The shadows weren't just hunting, they were infiltrating, converting ordinary citizens into vessels for their insidious agenda. Neighborhoods were no longer safe. Even the simplest act of stepping into dimly lit streets carried a risk of permanent manipulation. And yet, Lena understood something vital. If she could understand the origin of the shadows, perhaps she could find a way to sever their link to human consciousness. But to do so, she would need to venture into the places where shadows were strongest, where whispers were no longer subtle suggestions but commands, and where human fear had already given them immense power. The city was changing, one mind at a time, and the darkness had begun to whisper her name. The city had transformed into a labyrinth of fear. Streets once bustling with life were now silent corridors of looming shadows. Lena stood at the edge of what had once been downtown, staring at buildings whose windows glowed faintly not with light, but with the eerie shimmer of something unnatural. The shadows moved like smoke in the wind, stretching across alleys, crawling up walls, and pooling around street lamps as though they were gathering strength. Equipped with neural dampening devices she had improvised in her lab, Lena cautiously stepped forward. Each footfall echoed loudly in the silent night, and with every shadow she passed, whispers pierced her mind. "You cannot stop us. You cannot hide. Give in." She tightened her grip on the device, focusing on the faint pulse of light it emitted. It didn't stop the whispers entirely, but it allowed her to think, to resist. Her first encounter came in a collapsed subway tunnel. The shadows had amassed there in vast, writhing forms, coalescing into shapes that resembled humans but distorted, faceless, and cold. One of these shadow figures turned toward her, and Lena felt a psychic pull, an urge to flee, to surrender. But she held her ground. A device emitted a bright pulse, and for a moment the shape faltered, flickering like a broken hologram. Then Lena realized the horrifying truth. These weren't just random creatures. They were echoes, remnants of the minds they had consumed. Every person who vanished became part of the shadows' collective consciousness, their fears and memories entwined with the dark mass. The whispers weren't merely manipulation, they were communication among the shadows themselves, a network of stolen human thought. Determined to uncover their origin, Lena ventured further into the city's most shadowed sectors, abandoned hospitals, half-collapsed apartment complexes, and underground tunnels all bore witness to the shadows' growing power. The whispers evolved, becoming layered and dissonant, as if multiple minds were speaking at once. Lena's pulse quickened. Every corner seemed alive, every reflective surface a potential trap. Finally she reached the heart of the city, the old industrial district. Here, the shadows were concentrated, a nearly solid darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. Lena's device flickered violently, struggling against the sheer psychic force. And then she saw it, a colossal, amorphous shape, vast and undulating, composed of countless shadowed forms. Eyes, or what resembled eyes, opened briefly within it, staring directly at her. A chorus of voices flooded her mind. "You are alone. We are everywhere. Join us." Summoning all her strength, Lena activated her device at maximum output. Light exploded outward, fracturing the edges of the massive shadow entity. For the first time, she heard screams, faint human screams embedded within the darkness. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in tones that felt both alien and painfully familiar. Lena realized that if she could amplify this effect, she might force the shadows to release their human captives. But the risk was immense. Any mistake could leave her mind irreversibly entwined with theirs. And yet, Lena knew there was no turning back. The city's fate, and the minds of countless innocents, depended on her courage. As the whispers surged, promising oblivion, Lena took a deep breath and prepared to step into the very heart of the darkness. The heart of the darkness was not a place, but a presence. Lena felt it before she saw it, a pulsating, almost sentient void that stretched beyond the boundaries of reason. As she stepped closer, the whispers intensified, no longer mere suggestions, but an overwhelming flood of thoughts, memories, and fears. Every shadow in the district seemed to converge toward her, coalescing into semi-solid forms that writhed and stretched like living smoke. And then she saw it. At the epicenter of the darkness was a structure, or at least, what resembled a structure. It was organic yet alien, a massive lattice of black tendrils that extended in every direction, disappearing into the shadows above and below. Between the twisting strands, faint glimmers of stolen human memories flickered like broken holograms, faces, fragments of laughter, moments of despair. Lena understood instantly. This was the source. The shadows were not merely creatures, they were a hive, a psychic organism sustained entirely by human fear and thought. A voice, or rather, a chorus of voices penetrated her mind, clearer than ever. You see us now, but you cannot stop us. We are the darkness within, the forgotten, the silenced. Lena's knees buckled, the psychic pressure almost unbearable. Every fleeting memory of fear she had ever experienced was mirrored back at her, amplified 1,000-fold. The shadows were feeding on everything human, the doubts, the regrets, the loneliness, and in doing so, they grew stronger. But Lena had a plan. She activated her device at full power, flooding the area with intense light designed to disrupt the shadows' connection to human consciousness. For a brief moment, the tendrils recoiled, revealing the horrifying scale of the hive. Within the writhing darkness, she saw fragments of familiar faces, the missing, the vanished, each one a prisoner of the shadows, their minds trapped in the psychic web. Lena's heart pounded. If she could amplify the signal, she could free them, but it would require channeling her own consciousness into the hive, risking assimilation. Gathering every ounce of courage, Lena extended her mind, connecting to the shadows through the device. She could feel the hive's collective intelligence, probing her thoughts, teasing, testing. She focused on fear, but not her own. She directed it outward, a concentrated pulse of human defiance. The shadows shrieked and twisted violently, disoriented by the unfamiliar force. Lena pushed harder, using every memory, every spark of willpower to fracture the psychic chains holding the captives. And then she understood something crucial. The shadows were not invincible. Their strength came from fear and isolation. The more the city succumbed to panic, the stronger they became. But unity, courage, and clarity, those were vulnerabilities. Lena realized that the fight was not only in the hive but across the city. If she could rally the citizens, help them resist the whispers, the shadows could be weakened, maybe even defeated. Exhausted, battered by the psychic assault, Lena pulled back, barely maintaining her grip on reality. The hive shrieked in frustration, a collective sound that shook the very air. She knew the next step would be the most dangerous yet, confronting the shadows outside the hive, spreading through the city, and attempting to break their hold on humanity. The battle for the city and for the minds of its people was only beginning. The city was no longer recognizable. The streets that once teemed with life were shrouded in an oppressive darkness, the shadows stretching like black rivers through alleys and high-rise corridors. Windows glowed faintly with an unnatural shimmer, hinting at the countless minds trapped within. Lena knew that time was slipping away. If she didn't act quickly, the shadows would consume the entire city, one thought at a time. Lena reached out to the authorities and media, broadcasting warnings and instructions on resisting the whispers. She urged citizens to stay in groups, keep lights on, and focus on calm, positive thoughts. Initially, skepticism was rampant. People thought the chaos was an elaborate hoax or mass hysteria. But as shadows began manifesting openly in neighborhoods, creeping along walls, blocking streets, and even whispering through phone calls, panic turned to action. People barricaded doors, formed watch groups, and resisted the intrusive thoughts with surprising resilience. The first confrontations were harrowing. Shadows attacked in waves, slithering across the streets, probing for fear. One group of volunteers encountered a shadow that seemed almost human, its form flickering between the familiar and the alien. It whispered secrets, promises, and threats, attempting to fracture their unity. Lena coordinated from her makeshift command center, using her device to amplify light pulses that temporarily dissolved the shadow's forms. But for every shadow repelled, two more seemed to take its place, as if the hive were learning, adapting. Amidst this chaos, Lena discovered a startling pattern. Certain areas acted as anchor points, where shadows were stronger and more organized. These were places saturated with fear-abandoned hospitals, desolate schools, and underground tunnels. The hive drew power from collective human despair, and the more hopelessness it found, the faster it spread. Lena realized that the city's survival depended on eliminating these anchors, restoring light both literal and metaphorical to these spaces. A team of volunteers followed Lena into one of the largest anchor points, an abandoned theater in the heart of downtown. The air was thick with a tangible darkness, almost suffocating, and the whispers were deafening. Shadows swirled around every corner, forming grotesque mockeries of human shapes. Lena's device flared, sending beams of intense light into the theater, and for the first time, she saw faces freed from the darkness, blinking and disoriented, but alive. Encouraged, she pushed deeper, systematically dismantling the hive's power source. But the shadows were not passive. They retaliated with calculated ferocity. Whispers turned into invasive commands, targeting volunteers individually, trying to sow distrust, fear, and confusion. Lena's heart raced as she battled not only the darkness outside but also the creeping invasion within her own mind. Every step required extraordinary focus, every breath a defiance against the psychic pull. By dawn, the immediate threat in the theater had been neutralized. The freed citizens emerged, dazed but awake, and Lena realized that momentum could now be used to reclaim more of the city. The shadows were formidable, intelligent, and relentless, but they were not invincible. Their power depended entirely on the fear they harvested, and if humanity could hold fast, resist, and unite, there was a chance to turn the tide. Dawn broke over the city, but the light was tenuous, filtered through the last vestiges of creeping darkness. Lena stood atop a crumbling skyscraper, her device humming with energy, surveying the streets below. The citizens, emboldened by the theater's liberation, moved with purpose, carrying portable lights, mirrors, and other reflective surfaces to disrupt the shadow's influence. For the first time, hope glimmered amidst the oppressive gloom. The hive was aware of their resistance. Shadows surged in coordinated waves, crawling across streets like living rivers of black ink, forming monstrous silhouettes that mimicked the citizens' worst fears. Whispers became a chorus of terror, invading minds relentlessly. "You cannot win. We are eternal. Surrender." Lena's pulse raced as she felt the psychic pressure pushing against her thoughts, trying to fracture her resolve. Every freed mind she had seen flicker in her memory, a reminder that failure meant their entrapment. Lena activated her device at full capacity, flooding the area with blinding light and harmonic pulses designed to disrupt the shadow's psychic network. For a moment, the darkness hesitated, writhing violently, unable to maintain its cohesion. Citizens followed her lead, raising mirrors and lights, reflecting beams into the densest areas of shadows. The effect was immediate: fragmented, confused, and screaming. The shadows recalled their forms, breaking apart into flickering wisps. But the hive was cunning. A massive shadow, larger than any Lena had encountered, surged from the city's central square. Its form was a horrifying composite of countless faces, memories, and fears, pulsating with raw psychic energy. The whispers now attacked not just the mind, but the very will of those who resisted. Lena's device struggled to contain it. She realized then that the only way to destroy the hive was to confront it directly, to inject her own consciousness into the network and disrupt it from within. Taking a deep breath, Lena focused her mind, projecting herself into the heart of the hive. She felt 1,000 stolen memories collide against her, each one screaming in terror, sadness, and anger. But Lena was resolute. Channeling every shred of human courage she could summon, she unraveled the psychic threads holding the hive together. Light, unity, and defiance surged through her projection, and the hive shrieked, twisting, and collapsing under the weight of its own fractured consciousness. Outside, the citizens watched as the darkness receded, wisp by wisp, until the city's streets were free once more. Windows reflected the rising sun, and the air, once heavy and suffocating, felt breathable again. Freed minds blinked, disoriented but alive, their terror replaced with relief and gratitude. Lena collapsed, exhausted but triumphant, her device smoking softly at her side. The whispers had ended, but the memory of them lingered. The shadows had been defeated, but their existence was a stark reminder. Fear, isolation, and despair could summon horrors beyond imagination. Lena knew that vigilance would always be necessary, that light, both literal and metaphorical, must never be taken for granted. As the city slowly awakened, rebuilding from the nightmarish siege, Lena looked toward the horizon. The shadows were gone for now, but somewhere, beyond the edges of perception, the universe was vast and strange, and she understood one immutable truth: humanity's greatest weapon against the darkness was its courage to face it together. The whispers were silenced, but the shadow's warning echoed in her mind. We are always watching, always waiting.